Spring of 1867 brought no promises, only the heavy silence of survival. Samuel Hart rode west with nothing left but a battered rifle and a fading hope. In the midst of the frontier, he met Lena Greyfeather, a girl trapped between two worlds. Their meeting wouldn't save them. It would challenge everything they thought they knew about strength, trust, and belonging. Because the wilderness doesn't just test you, it remakes you. The sun hung low over the Mississippi plains, casting the broken earth in bruised shades of orange and violet. Samuel Hart adjusted the strap of his rifle, feeling the familiar tug across his sore shoulder. Dust clung to his boots, his hat, even the lines etched deep into his weathered face. It had been a long ride, longer than he cared to count, and the road west stretched endlessly ahead, like a dare he couldn't refuse. The war had ended 2 years ago, but for Samuel, peace was a cruel illusion. He carried too many names in his head, too many faces he'd failed to save. Some nights, when the prairie winds howled just right, he could still hear them calling to him. So he kept riding, not toward something, just away. By midday, his canteen ran dry. Samuel slowed his horse, a gray gelding nearly as worn as he was, and scanned the landscape. To the south, a narrow ribbon of trees hinted at water. He nudged the horse gently with his heels, steering toward salvation. As they approached the tree line, the smell of fresh river water reached him, sharp and clean. He dismounted stiffly, his legs protesting every movement, and led the horse to drink. Cupping his hands, he scooped water to his cracked lips, letting the cold shock of it clear some of the dust from his throat. That's when he heard it, a rustle, faint but unmistakable, somewhere upstream. His hand went instinctively to the rifle slung over his back. Eyes narrowing, Samuel stepped away from the horse and into the brush, moving slow, careful not to snap a twig underfoot. Another sound, a soft grunt, a muttered curse, carried down the breeze. Human. Female. Samuel crept closer, parting the dense foliage with the barrel of his rifle. What he saw made him pause. A young woman, maybe 17 or 18, crouched by the riverbank. Her clothes, a battered deerskin tunic and worn moccasins, were soaked. Dark hair clung to her cheeks in damp tangles. She was struggling to gather a net tangled around a few desperate fish, her hands trembling with cold or fatigue. Maybe both. She hadn't noticed him yet. Samuel lowered his rifle slightly, studying her. She moved with the cautious tension of someone who had been hunted before. Her face was thin, sharp, not from malice, but from hunger. And there was a look in her eyes, fierce, wary, that Samuel recognized all too well. Survivor. Before he could decide whether to step forward or slip away unseen, the girl spun around, a knife flashing in her hand. "Stay back," she barked, her voice ragged but strong. Samuel raised both hands, palms open. "Easy now," he said, voice low and even. "Ain't looking for trouble." The girl kept the knife between them, her eyes darting around like a cornered fox. "You travel alone?" she demanded. Samuel nodded. "Name's Hart. Samuel Hart. Just passing through." He glanced meaningfully at her net. "Looks like you could use an extra hand." The girl hesitated, knife still raised. Finally, with a slow breath, she lowered it. "Not away entirely, just a fraction. Enough." "Lena," she muttered. "Lena Greyfeather." Samuel gave a slight nod. He'd heard the surname before. Greyfeather. Likely Lakota blood, maybe mixed with settlers somewhere down the line. A hard life either way these days. "You hungry?" he asked, fishing into his saddlebag and pulling out a hard biscuit. Lena's eyes flicked to it, then back to him, distrust written plain on her face. After a moment's hesitation, she snatched the biscuit, biting into it with ravenous speed. They sat in silence for a while, the river gurgling quietly between them. Samuel kept half an eye on the woods. Trust was a dangerous thing out here, but if Lena meant him harm, she was doing a fine job hiding it under exhaustion. "You got family nearby?" he asked finally. Lena shook her head, crumbs dusting her lap. "Gone," she said simply. No elaboration, none needed. Samuel understood. Too many stories like that scattered across the frontier. Some folks told them with screams, others with silence. "You got somewhere to go?" he asked. Lena stared out across the water, where the sun was sinking into the trees like a coin into a wishing well. Her shoulders sagged. Nowhere left, she said. Samuel chewed the inside of his cheek, thinking. He hadn't set out to find a companion. Hell, he wasn't sure he was fit company for anyone anymore. But leaving this girl here alone would be the same as signing her death warrant. You can ride with me, he said at last. For a while, if you want. Lena's head snapped toward him, suspicion flaring in her dark eyes. Samuel didn't blame her. Not asking anything in return, he said. Just easier to survive two against the world than one. For a long time, Lena said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. Once. Samuel exhaled, tension he hadn't realized he was holding easing from his chest. He stood and offered a hand. After a heartbeat of hesitation, Lena took it. As they moved back toward his horse, Samuel caught a glimpse of something in her face. Something fragile and fierce all at once. Hope. It was a dangerous thing to carry out here, but maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what they needed. Tomorrow the road would stretch out again, empty and endless, but for tonight they had a fire, a rifle, and a reason to keep walking. Sometimes that was enough. The fire crackled low between them, sending slender fingers of light flickering across the hollow where they'd made camp. Samuel sat with his back against a rock, cleaning his rifle with slow, steady motions. Lena huddled closer to the flames, her knees drawn tight against her chest. The blanket Samuel had offered wrapped around her shoulders like a shield. Neither had said much since they'd set up camp. Some silences were just too heavy to break with idle talk. Night had settled hard over the wilderness. The sky above them stretched wide and black, the stars pricking the darkness like shards of broken glass. The sound of the river they'd crossed earlier murmured faintly in the background, soothing but reminding them they were deep in no man's land. Samuel watched Lena out of the corner of his eye. She was jumpy, her gaze constantly darting toward the dark tree line. Survival instinct. He understood. Too many things out here wore human faces but hunted worse than beasts. You sleep much out here alone? Samuel asked finally, voice quiet. Lena shook her head. Not unless I have to. He nodded. That tracked. You got a plan? He asked, setting the rifle aside and tossing a fresh log onto the fire. Lena hesitated. Find work, maybe. Someplace that don't care much who you are or where you come from. Samuel gave a small grunt of approval. Smart. Ranch hands, trail cooks, scouts. They don't ask many questions if you pull your weight. Lena hugged the blanket tighter. You? He shrugged. Same. Keep moving west. Maybe find land of my own someday. Somewhere nobody gives a damn about the color of your coat or the ghost riding your back. Lena tilted her head slightly, studying him. You got ghosts? Samuel chuckled dryly. Who doesn't? The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks up into the night. Lena shifted, stretching out her legs stiffly. You fight in the war? Samuel's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded once. Yeah, he said, voice rough, and I lost more than I won. The girl didn't press, and Samuel was grateful for it. Some wounds didn't bear poking. Instead, she spoke of her own losses, her words low and careful, like setting down something fragile. My father was white, mother Lakota. They didn't much belong anywhere either. Tried carving out a life on the edges. Didn't last. Samuel listened without interrupting. The pain in her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, honed by years of carrying it alone. Army patrol found our cabin. Said we were harboring hostiles, Lena said, staring into the fire. Didn't matter that we just wanted to be left alone. Samuel felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. He'd seen it before. Families burned out, homes razed in the name of order. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. Lena shrugged, but the motion was brittle. Not your fault. The fire burned lower. Crickets sang in the darkness. Somewhere distant, a coyote called. A thin, mournful sound that made the world feel bigger and lonelier all at once. Samuel pushed himself to his feet with a grunt. His body ached in the familiar ways. Old wounds, long rides, too many nights sleeping under open skies. He checked the perimeter of their small camp, moving quietly, eyes sharp for anything that didn't belong. Lena watched him from her seat by the fire. alert but not anxious. She was beginning to relax. Not much, but a little. Enough. When he returned, Samuel tossed another log onto the fire and settled back down. "You should get some sleep," he said. "I'll take first watch." Lena hesitated. Trusting anyone didn't come easy. Still, exhaustion weighed heavy on her features, dragging at the sharp lines of her young face. Finally, she nodded, curling into a tighter ball beneath the blanket. Her eyes fluttered closed almost immediately. Samuel leaned back, one hand resting on his rifle, and let his mind drift. The girl was tough, smart, had instincts that would keep her alive, but she was also carrying more than she should have at her age. Loneliness, anger, loss. He knew the weight of it, how it could hollow a person out from the inside if left untended. He glanced toward her sleeping form. Maybe, just maybe, they could outrun their ghosts together. He turned his eyes back to the darkness beyond the fire, listening to the night, and waited. Because out here it wasn't a matter of if trouble came, only when. Morning came pale and cold, mist clinging low over the riverbank as if reluctant to let go of the night. Samuel stirred the dying embers of their fire, tossing dry twigs into the coals until they caught with a reluctant hiss. Lena sat nearby, knees drawn up, staring silently into the trees. Her hair was still tangled, her face smudged with dirt, but there was a steadiness to her now that hadn't been there the night before. Survival sharpened people like that. "You hungry?" Samuel asked, breaking the brittle silence. Lena nodded once. Samuel handed her the last of their dried meat, rough and stringy, but better than nothing. They ate without speaking, the soft crunch of frost underfoot and the distant burble of the river filling the gaps. Afterwards, Samuel packed their few belongings with brisk efficiency. His instincts prickled, that old soldier's itch between his shoulder blades. Something about the stillness didn't sit right. "We should move," he said. Lena didn't argue. She rose to her feet with a soft grunt, adjusting the blanket over her shoulders like a makeshift cloak. They headed west, sticking close to the tree line, where the cover was thicker. The ground was muddy from spring rains, the soft earth sucking at their boots. It wasn't long before Samuel spotted it. A trail, fresh tracks. He knelt, studying the ground. Hoof prints, deep and sharp. At least 3 horses, maybe 4. The impressions were too fresh to be yesterday's work. They'd passed through less than an hour ago. Samuel straightened slowly, scanning the woods ahead. "Riders," he said quietly. "Close." Lena stiffened. "Bandits?" "Maybe," Samuel muttered. "Maybe worse." Out here, worse could mean army scouts, bounty hunters, deserters turned raiders, men who answered to nothing but greed and the law of force. Samuel motioned for Lena to follow and veered off the main trail, threading through a thicket of brush. They moved quickly but carefully, every step chosen with a soldier's precision. As they crested a low rise, Samuel dropped into a crouch, pulling Lena down beside him. Below them, maybe 100 yards off, 4 riders picked their way through the trees. Hard-eyed men, rough in their saddles, rifles strapped across their backs. One wore a blue Union jacket stained with dirt and blood. Another had a crude tattoo scrawled across his neck. A snake coiled around a skull. Mercenaries. Killers. The type who didn't ask questions before pulling triggers. Samuel's jaw tightened. They weren't just passing through. They were hunting, and it wasn't hard to guess who they might be hunting. One of the men pointed toward the riverbank, barking something Samuel couldn't quite catch. The others turned their horses that way, spurring them into a trot. Samuel let out a slow breath, tension humming through him. "They're tracking us," he said grimly. Lena's face paled, but her eyes remained steady. "What do we do?" Samuel's mind raced. Fighting 4 men with just 1 rifle and a handful of rounds was suicide. Running blind across open ground wasn't much better. He glanced at the dense woods to their north. Rugged, wild country, full of steep ravines and thick undergrowth. Dangerous terrain, slow terrain, but it might buy them time. "This way," he said, rising into a crouch. "Move fast, stay low." They slipped into the shadows, disappearing among the twisted trees. For an hour they pushed deeper into the wilderness, climbing over rocks slick with moss, fording icy streams, weaving through thorn thickets that tore at their clothes. Samuel moved carefully, setting a brutal but necessary pace. Every minute they stayed ahead was another minute alive. But he could hear them now. The occasional crack of a branch, the low murmur of rough voices. Closer. "They're gaining," Lena panted, her face streaked with sweat and mud. Samuel nodded grimly. "We need an edge." He scanned the landscape, heart pounding. There, a narrow defile between two rocky hills, just wide enough for a single rider at a time. Perfect. "Come on," he urged, leading Lena toward the pass. "We'll bottleneck them here." They reached the rocky gap and quickly took cover behind a pile of fallen stones. Samuel positioned himself at a choke point where he'd have a clear shot. He turned to Lena, pressing a small pistol into her hands. An old, battered weapon, but functional. "Last resort," he said. "If they get close." She swallowed hard but nodded, her small hands tightening around the grip. The minutes stretched long and taut. Samuel's finger rested lightly on the trigger of his rifle. Sweat trickled down his temple despite the cool air. Then, hoofbeats. Closer. The first rider appeared at the mouth of the pass, his rifle held loosely across his saddle. Samuel exhaled once, steadying himself, then fired. The shot cracked through the trees, echoing like a cannon blast. The rider jerked violently and tumbled from his horse. Chaos erupted. The others spurred forward, shouting, their horses balking at the narrow approach. One tried to circle around, but the terrain was too steep. Another dismounted and rushed forward on foot. Samuel fired again, forcing the second man to dive for cover. Behind him, Lena crouched low, her pistol trembling in her hands but ready. The fight wasn't over, but they had a chance now. And sometimes, out here, a chance was all you needed. Gunfire cracked the morning wide open. Samuel worked the bolt of his rifle with grim efficiency, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Every shot had to count. Every mistake could be the last. The second bandit scrambled behind a fallen tree, returning fire blindly. A round whistled past Samuel's ear, slamming into the rocks behind him. Pebbles showered down, stinging his cheek. "Stay down!" Samuel barked to Lena without looking. She pressed tighter against the stones, her knuckles white on the pistol grip. The third rider dismounted at the edge of the pass, crouching low. He motioned to the others, trying to coordinate a flanking move. Samuel cursed under his breath. They were trained. Not just wild raiders, but soldiers once, maybe. Men who'd learned dirty tricks during the war and hadn't forgotten them. They'd seen Samuel's position now. They knew it was just him and the girl. They thought time and numbers would win the day. Samuel had other ideas. He shifted slightly, finding a better angle, and waited. Patience was a weapon, too. When the man behind the tree popped his head up to fire again, Samuel squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean. The man toppled backward, a ragged hole above his brow. Two left. Samuel ducked low, reloading fast. He heard the others shouting, one cursing, another trying to rally. Hoofbeats pounded as a horse reared nearby, the animal spooked by blood and smoke. Lena edged closer to him, her breathing shallow. "They're splitting up," she whispered. Samuel followed her gaze. One rider stayed near the mouth of the pass, trying to pin them down. The other was gone, circling wide, trying to find another way in. Smart and dangerous. Samuel's mind raced. They couldn't hold here forever. Ammo was running low. His injured leg throbbed, his strength waning. "We're pulling back," he muttered. Lena stared at him, wide-eyed. "Into the trees?" He nodded. "Deeper. Force them to come to us, where they can't use the horses." Together they moved. Samuel covered their retreat, firing a quick shot to keep the visible rider pinned. Lena led the way, darting between the rocks and into the dense underbrush beyond. The forest swallowed them quickly, thick pines and heavy brush masking their movements. Samuel limped but pushed forward, using every scrap of soldier's training he had left. They ran until the shouts behind them faded into the general noise of the forest. Only then did they collapse into a shallow ravine, gasping for air. Samuel pressed his back against a tree, scanning the woods. His pulse roared in his ears. His leg felt like it was on fire. "You all right?" Lena asked, her voice raw. "I'll live," he rasped. "You?" She managed a small nod. Sweat streaked her dirt-smeared face, but her hands were steady. braver than most grown men Samuel had known. "They'll come after us," she said. "Good," Samuel said grimly. "Let them come. They don't know this ground." Neither did he, truth be told. But wilderness was an ally to those willing to listen. He quickly outlined a plan. They would move north, toward the old dry creek bed he'd glimpsed earlier. It would offer concealment, maybe even a place to set another ambush if needed. More importantly, it would confuse their pursuers. In thick woods like this, tracks tangled easy. They moved fast and silent, following game trails that twisted and doubled back. Samuel used every trick he remembered from Army Scouts, brushing out their footprints with branches, stepping on rocks where they could, leaving false trails. Still, by midday, Samuel knew they hadn't shaken them completely. He could feel it, that prickling awareness on the back of his neck. The same feeling he'd had when Confederate sharpshooters hunted him through the Tennessee woods. They crested a ridge and found themselves overlooking a shallow valley. At the bottom, nestled against a rock face, was a ruin, the skeletal remains of an old frontier cabin. Half the roof was caved in, but the stone wall still stood. Samuel studied it quickly. Solid back, only one real approach. High ground all around. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than dying on open ground. He turned to Lena. "We make our stand there." She didn't argue, just nodded, tightening the blanket around her shoulders and following him down the slope. Inside the ruins, Samuel set to work. He positioned broken boards and fallen logs to create rough cover, cleared a field of fire at the narrow approach, gave Lena clear instructions, when to shoot, when to stay down. She listened carefully, soaking in every word. As the afternoon dragged toward evening, a heavy stillness fell. And then, voices, closing fast. Samuel crouched low behind the stone wall, his rifle trained on the gap in the ruins. He caught Lena's eye. No words, just a nod. Ready. The first of their pursuers crested the ridge, dark shapes against the failing light. Moving cautiously now, rifles up, eyes scanning. Samuel waited. Not yet. Not yet. When the first man stepped into range, Samuel fired. The shot cracked across the valley like a whip. The fight for survival, for hope, for freedom, had truly begun. The first shot echoed through the valley, shattering the stillness like glass under a hammer. Samuel worked the bolt of his rifle with ruthless precision, feeling every ounce of his remaining strength gather in his hands. The lead bandit dropped, crumpling to the dusty ground. A second hesitated, just for a breath. And that was all Samuel needed. Another crack of gunfire, and he too fell. But there were more, always more. The remaining men fanned out, firing blindly toward the ruins, their bullets slamming into the stone walls with vicious force. Shards of rock and dust filled the air. Samuel ducked lower, checking Lena's position. She was crouched behind a fallen beam, hands steady on the old pistol he'd given her. Her eyes were wide but clear, focused, brave. Good. She had to be, because this was going to get worse before it got better. The bandits regrouped, yelling orders Samuel couldn't quite make out over the thunder of their rifles. He counted at least 4, maybe 5, still in the fight. And they were getting smarter, moving to flank them. Samuel grimaced. They couldn't hold the ruins forever. At best, it was a temporary shield, a chance to bloody the enemy and make them think twice. But if they stayed pinned, it would be a slow death. They had to move. Soon. A sharp whistle cut the air. A signal. 2 figures broke cover on the left, trying to circle wide around the ruins. Samuel pivoted, firing twice in rapid succession. One man dropped, screaming. The other hit the dirt and crawled back the way he came. Samuel's breathing was ragged now, sweat dripping into his eyes. His injured leg throbbed with every heartbeat, and his shoulder, the one that had taken a musket ball back at Cold Harbor, burned like fire. But he forced himself to stay sharp, stay alive. If not for himself, then for the girl. Another barrage of bullets struck the ruins. A stone shattered near Lena, peppering her with fragments. She cried out, more in shock than pain, but Samuel's heart clenched at the sound. "We can't stay here," she called, her voice strained but strong. Samuel knew she was right. He scanned the terrain, fast, desperate, and found their only option. a narrow gully leading away from the cabin, half choked with brambles but deep enough to offer cover. It was risky, but it was that or die in a pile of broken stones. He made the decision instantly. "Lena!" he shouted over the gunfire. "When I say go, run for that gully." He pointed and she nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. Samuel took a deep breath, then rose slightly above the wall, drawing the enemy's fire. Bullets whistled past him, close enough to feel their passage. "Go!" he roared. Lena sprinted fast and low, weaving through the debris. Samuel fired wildly over her head, covering her retreat. She made it to the gully and threw herself down, waving frantically for him to follow. Samuel ducked another shot, then limped after her, every step a battle against the pain. Behind him, he heard the bandits shouting, realizing too late what was happening. A few stray bullets chased him, but none found their mark. He collapsed into the gully beside Lena, gasping for breath. She helped drag him deeper into the ravine, using the dense brush to shield their movements. For several agonizing minutes, they crawled and scrambled forward, hearts hammering, lungs burning. Only when the sounds of pursuit faded behind them did they dare slow. Samuel slumped against a rock, clutching his side. Blood soaked his shirt, not a fresh wound, but the reopening of old injuries. Lena knelt beside him, her face pale but determined. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm alive," Samuel rasped. "That's enough for now." They needed distance, they needed time, and they needed a plan. Samuel forced himself to his feet, gritting his teeth against the pain. "We head north," he said, "toward the river. They'll expect us to head east, back toward town." Lena hesitated. "And if they find us again?" Samuel met her gaze. "If they do," he chambered another round into his rifle with grim finality. "They won't find us the same way." They moved on, slipping through the undergrowth like shadows. The sun sank lower, staining the sky with blood-red streaks. Ahead, the land dropped away into a broad valley, and beyond it, the gleam of water. The river. Hope flared in Samuel's chest. Not safety, not yet, but a chance, a fighting chance. And sometimes that was enough. As night fell, they found a shallow cave above the river. Little more than an overhang, but it would do. They made camp in silence, too exhausted to talk. Lena kindled a small, smokeless fire, using dried moss and twigs Samuel had shown her how to gather. He tended to his wounds, wrapping them tightly with strips torn from his shirt. Finally, when the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, Lena spoke. "You saved me," she said simply. Samuel shook his head. "You saved yourself," he murmured. "I just gave you a chance." She looked at him across the flickering fire, her eyes shining with something raw and real. Trust, respect, gratitude, maybe even the beginnings of something more. Samuel didn't know what the future held, didn't know if they'd survive the next day, the next week. But sitting there, bruised and battered and alive, he realized something. For the first time since the war, he didn't feel alone. Not really, and that, for now, was enough. Morning broke cold and gray. The river mist curled around the rocks like ghostly fingers, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried into the empty sky. Samuel stirred beneath his makeshift blanket, every muscle aching. He sat up slowly, his rifle resting across his knees, and glanced over at Lena. She was already awake, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring out at the water. There was something different about her now, something steadier, stronger. Not the terrified girl he'd first seen cornered by outlaws, not just a survivor, something more. He stood, biting back a groan as his leg protested. They couldn't afford to linger. The bandits might still be out there, and the river wouldn't protect them forever. "We move soon," he said quietly. Lena nodded but didn't rise immediately. Instead, she picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water. 3 clean bounces before it sank. "I never thought I'd make it this far," she said softly. Samuel knelt beside her, watching the ripples fade. "You didn't make it this far by luck," he said. "You made it by fighting." She smiled faintly. "You helped." Samuel shrugged. "You would have found a way with or without me." He meant it too. There was a fire in Lena, small at first, but growing stronger every day. Still, the question remained. What next? Neither of them could keep running forever. Samuel gazed across the river to the hills beyond. There were settlements out there, some good, some bad. Places where a man could carve out a life, maybe even places where a girl like Lena could be more than just another stray on the wind. I know a place, he said after a long moment. Small town, newer than most. Folks there are trying to build something real. It's not much yet, but... He trailed off, uncertain. But Lena turned to him, eyes bright. Take me there, she said simply. Samuel chuckled under his breath. Just like that. No fear, no hesitation. All right then, he said. We'll find you a fresh start. And you? She asked. What about your fresh start? Samuel hesitated, the weight of years pressing against him. He hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't dared. But looking at her now, full of fierce hope despite everything she'd endured, maybe it was time he did. Maybe I'll find one too, he said quietly. They packed quickly, what little they had, and set off along the river, keeping to the trees. Samuel leaned heavily on a stout branch he'd fashioned into a walking stick, but he refused to slow them down. The road was long and rough. Twice they heard riders in the distance and had to hide among the rocks. Once they found the half-eaten remains of a camp, fresh enough to remind them that the wilderness held threats far worse than bandits. But step by step, they pressed forward. At night, they camped under the stars, sharing scraps of food and stories, small pieces of themselves, slowly stitching trust where once there had been only necessity. Samuel told her about his brother who hadn't come back from the war, about the farm they'd dreamed of building together. Lena told him about her sister, lost to sickness when they were small, and about the book she'd carried in her satchel, the one thing she hadn't been able to save. By the third day, the land began to change. The dense forest gave way to open grasslands, and in the distance they saw the thin line of smoke rising from a small town nestled at the foot of the hills. That's it, Samuel said, his voice rough with exhaustion, and something else. Hope. As they approached, wary eyes watched them from porches and dusty windows. Travelers were not always welcome these days. Too many refugees, too many thieves. But Samuel straightened his back, set his jaw, and walked with the quiet authority of a man who wasn't looking for trouble, but would give it back twice over if pressed. A few townsfolk nodded cautiously. A woman with a basket of laundry offered Lena a small, curious smile. A man tending horses paused, tipping his hat slightly. It wasn't a warm welcome, but it wasn't a closed door either. Samuel led Lena toward the small general store at the center of town. We'll get you some proper boots first, he said. Maybe a coat that fits. And you? Lena asked, her lips twitching in a rare, teasing smile. Going to buy yourself a new shirt? Samuel looked down at the tattered remains of his own. Maybe two, he admitted dryly. Inside the store, the keeper, a wiry old man with sharp eyes, watched them carefully, but didn't turn them away. Samuel traded what little he had left, a battered silver watch, a few cartridges, and a favor owed by a man he'd once saved from a lynch mob. In return, they got supplies, enough for a beginning. As they stepped back out into the afternoon sun, Samuel glanced at Lena. She was standing taller now, smiling more easily. Not a frightened girl anymore, not a prisoner of her past. And for the first time since the guns fell silent back east, Samuel felt it too. A beginning. Maybe they would build something here. Maybe they would find family again. Not the one lost to war or fate, but one chosen freely. As they walked down the dusty street side by side, Lena nudged him lightly. You never told me, she said. What are we going to call ourselves? Samuel considered. Then he smiled. Small but real. Whatever we want, he said. That's the whole point, isn't it? And together they kept walking, into a future neither of them had dared dream of, but one they would now claim as their own.